Welcome to Believing the Word with author and pastor Dan Shunk. This program is a ministry of Calvary Chapel Chambersburg in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. Here's what's coming up in today's message.
None of these settlements that used to be can even be found today. So very interesting the way he describes that they will become a desolation forever. Of course, Nebuchadnezzar, it's described here, comes in and takes the spoil of their goods and of their animals. That's all described in what we just read. But there are giant swaths of Saudi Arabia today that just have nothing. No inhabitants, no man-made structures of any kind. Saudi Arabia is huge. Go look on a map sometime. It's got a couple of places where there's people, and other than that, there's nothing there.
Justice feels uneven. Some are held accountable, others seem untouchable. Jeremiah 49 shatters that illusion. God speaks to nations who believed their strength, vocation, or influence put them beyond judgment. One by one, he reminds them, and us, that no one is outside his reach. No injustice is overlooked, no arrogance goes unnoticed. This chapter declares a sobering truth and a steady hope. God is the judge of all the earth, and his justice is certain. It may not be immediate, but it is inevitable, and it is always right. Now here's Pastor Dan in the book of Jeremiah as he continues his message, and justice for all.
But interesting there in verse 6, it says, "Afterwards I will return the fortunes of the sons of Ammon." In the end, they're restored to their land. Some of these nations, we even saw through the last few chapters, some of these nations, the Lord says, I'm not going to make a full end to you. You will be restored. Some of them, he says, you will be wiped out. You will cease from being a people. Here's this one, the children of Ammon, where he says, I will return your captivity, or I will, your fortunes, either way you want to say it. He's not going to make a full end to them. And we saw in when they redid the lines of the Middle East in 1921, Amman, Jordan was declared the capital of Transjordan when they redrew the lines all over again. It's very interesting that sometimes we think these things are just so random, like, the League of Nations that just decided to redraw the Middle East in the 1920s, and they drew out what we call Jordan today. They called it Transjordan. And sometimes we just think it's so random, the way things work, right? Well, it's not very random. I want you to see this map. I wonder if you can see this here. But the map on the left is a map of what is said to be the nation of Israel during the 1,000-year kingdom of Christ. I'm convinced that only 1 out of 10 Christians actually knows what they're praying whenever they pray the Lord's Prayer and they say, Thy will be done, Thy kingdom come. I'm convinced that not very many people actually understand what that means, that there's a 1,000-year kingdom coming to this earth that we will rule and reign with Christ in. And this map on the left side is a map that Ezekiel gives us. Well, again, we'll get to this soon in Ezekiel 40 through 48. That is the layout of the 12 tribes of Israel during the 1,000-year millennium. Very interesting if you can line this up with the map on the right, because the map on the right is a modern map of the nation of Israel and Jordan. And you might be able, let me just try to orient you just a little bit. One of the interesting notes here that I'm trying to point out is you might be able to see the Dead Sea on the Ezekiel map. You go up the Dead Sea, up the Jordan River to the Sea of Galilee, right? And the nation of Israel is on the west of the Dead Sea, it's on the west of the Jordan River, and then it's on both sides of the Sea of Galilee. You look at the modern map today, and you see the nation of Israel right here. Here's the Dead Sea, right? You have Amman, Jordan, and then there's the Sea of Galilee right there. This cutoff right here, you can see it on the map right there, right below the Sea of Galilee. So as if the Lord planned for this to happen, where the Jordanians, the children of Ammon, would have their land in the last days. So there's no reason to think that the borders of the nation of Jordan that is there today will change. Seems like the Lord's going to keep it pretty close to the way it is right now. When we get into the 1,000-year millennial kingdom, Jordan's going to get to keep their land. Pretty much the way it is. So says the Lord. I didn't make that up. Neither did the League of Nations in the 1920s. They were obeying the Lord's will whether they knew it or not. And so the children of Ammon, the descendants of Lot, will continue to be in their land until the end. And so that's the word against Ammon. And we go to verse 7. We're going to go to the second nation that chapter 49 lays out. And this is the descendants of Esau, the ancient nation called Edom. We read all about Edom all through the Old Testament. And through through this section of verse 7 through verse 22, we're going to see how Edom's wisdom isn't enough to save them. Justice is coming for them as well. And so let's look at the descendants of Jacob's brother Esau, starting in verse 7. Concerning Edom, thus saith Yahweh of hosts, is there no longer any wisdom in Teman? That's one of the cities of Edom. Has counsel been lost to the understanding? Has their wisdom decayed? In verse 8, flee away, turn back, inhabit the depths, O inhabitants of Dedan, for I will bring the disaster of Esau upon him at the time I punish him. Again, just kind of this opening, the Lord saying how destruction is going to come upon Edom. Of course, there's many names actually for Edom. The Edomites, it's the children of Esau. They're also called Seir in many different places. The New Testament will call them Edume, just sort of another language of the same word. And some of their major cities here in Edom were Bozrah, Petra, and Teman. That's already been mentioned right here. Petra will come into play very strongly later on. We're going to see the children of Israel having to flee in the tribulation to Petra. I wish we had another picture of Petra to put up there tonight. It's this giant rock city of Petra. It's amazing. Hardly anybody is around. It's a tourist attraction today, and it can hold tens and hundreds of thousands of people in this one place. So interesting reference here, though, in verse 7, that wisdom has gone away. Wisdom being no more in Teman. That's interesting because when you go back to the book of Job, and I say go back because the account of Job happened way before this. Most scholars would put the timing of the book of Job in the days of Abraham. And Job had a friend, Eliphaz, who was from Teman. And he was known as one of these wise counselors. And so even in the days here of Jeremiah, Teman is known for having its wise men. It does also mention another city here in verse 8. I want to point that out. It says, flee away, turn back, inhabit the depths, O inhabitants of Dedan. Dedan is not a city of this nation of Edom. It's simply saying to the people that are in Dedan, flee back, get away, because judgment's going to fall. So Dedan is not a city of the Edomites. They are from Arabia in the south. We'll get to that later on. And so let's continue into verse 9. Now that we have this opening, that judgment is coming to this ancient land of Edom. And of course, on the map, you've probably already seen this, but Edom was way down south of the Dead Sea. They kind of inhabited both the east and the western flanks of that southern Dead Sea area. By the time the New Testament comes, they're actually overrun on the eastern side, and they're only on the western side of the Dead Sea in the New Testament time period, and they're called the Edomites. In fact, we know a famous Edomite in the New Testament, the kings. King Herod and his whole family were Edomites. They weren't even Jewish. The king of the Jews, wasn't even Jewish. He was Edomite. So go figure that one out. They also bought and sold the priesthood, but we'll get into that some other time, okay? They didn't have leaders in the way they should have during those days. And so let's continue here in verse 9 about Edom. Verse 9, if grape gatherers came to you, would they not have gleanings remaining? If thieves came by night, they would ruin only until they had finished. But in verse 10, I have stripped Esau bare. I have uncovered his hidden places so that he will not be able to conceal himself. His seed or descendants has been destroyed along with his relatives and his neighbors, and he is no more. In verse 11, leave your orphans behind. I will keep them alive, and let your widows trust in me. So this is a mark of total destruction of the Edomites. But their widows and their orphans are invited to trust in the Lord and turn to the Lord, as everyone is. The idea of the widows and the orphans being called to turn to the Lord, it's all those that have no one. Turn to the Lord. Turn to all those that haven't made a choice yet. All those that don't know what to do. Turn to the Lord. As opposed to all of the men of Edom that have already made their choice to be in rebellion to the Lord. So the idea is they're called to leave their national identity and come and trust in the Lord, to turn over their whole identity and to join Yahweh and be in his family. Consider yourself an orphan and a widow and leave all of that behind and come to me, the Lord says. And let's go to verse 12. For thus says Yahweh, behold, those who are not under judgment to drink the cup will certainly drink it. But are you the one who will go completely unpunished? You will not go unpunished, but you will certainly drink it. In verse 13, for I have sworn by myself. By the way, that's a really strong phrase there in verse 13. I think it's said like 4 times in the whole of the Old Testament. The Lord swears by himself, and this is one of them. I swear by myself, declares Yahweh, that Bozrah will become an object of horror, a reproach, a ruin, and an imprecation, and all its cities will become perpetual ruins. In verse 14, I have heard a message from Yahweh, and an envoy is sent among the nations, saying, gather yourselves together and come against her, and rise up for battle. For behold, I will make you small among the nations, despised among men. For in verse 16, as for the terror of you, the arrogance of your heart has deceived you. O you who dwell in the clefts of the rock. And again, the rock city of Petra is one of the cities in their area. Continuing verse 16, who sees the height of the hill, though you make your nest as high as the eagles, I will bring you down from there, declares Yahweh. So their great wisdom in preparing these structures and carving this out of the rock like they did will not be enough to gain them victory in the day of judgment to come. We read in Ezekiel 25, and there's a 1-chapter book, minor prophet Obadiah. The entire 1-chapter book of Obadiah is all about this little nation of Edom and their judgment to come. That's your homework, okay? So I'll grade that next week and come in and we'll look at Obadiah. No, I'm just kidding. In Ezekiel 25 and Obadiah, it expressly talks about the great pride of Edom in trusting in their own smarts and their own wisdom and their violence against Israel, as we've talked about for all of these nations. And so all of that is described of Edom and how they've interacted. And now just finally here with Edom, starting in verse 17, Edom will become an object of horror. Everyone who passes by it will be horrified and will hiss at all its wounds. In verse 18, like the overthrow of Sodom and Gomorrah with its neighbors, says Yahweh, no one will live there, nor will a son of man sojourn in it. Behold, one will come up like a lion from the thickets of the Jordan River against an enduring pasture. For in an instant I will make him run away from it, and whoever is chosen I shall appoint over it. For who is like me, and who will summons me to court? In other words, nobody can, right? God's always right. And finishing verse 19, and who then is the shepherd who can stand against me? Therefore, hear the counsel of Yahweh, which he has counseled against Edom, and his purposes, which he has purposed against the inhabitants of this city of Teman. Surely they will drag them off, even the little ones of the flock. Surely he will make their pasture desolate because of them. In verse 21, the earth has quaked at the noise of their downfall. There is an outcry. The noise of it has been heard at the Red Sea, which of course is going over towards Egypt at their border. And then finally, verse 22, behold, I will mount up and swoop like an eagle and spread out his wings against Bozrah, and the hearts of the mighty men of Edom in that day will be like the heart of a woman in labor. The idea is there will be no strength or resistance left, is the idea. So, and we know that this is Babylon, again, that comes and does this ultimate destruction of these Edomites. They remain, some of them come back after the Babylonian captivity, similar to Israel. They do retain a bit of their identity. Like we said, they go into the New Testament time period in a much smaller area known as the Edume at that point. Same thing, different language. So interesting here, though, at the end of verse 19, it said, no one can speak against the decisions of God. I love that. Who could take me to court, God says. There's a verse here in Psalm 19, verse 9, I think really goes along with this. Very interesting. It says, the fear of Yahweh is clean, enduring forever. The judgments of Yahweh are true. They are righteous altogether. That is the God we serve. When he judges, you never have to wonder if it's right or wrong. We read in Revelation, actually, later on during the tribulation, as judgment is, the wrath of God is falling on the earth. And the church and everybody in heaven is saying, true and righteous are your judgments, O God. No one will ever wonder about whether or not what he did was right or wrong. Everyone that gets judged had time and knowledge to repent, and they didn't. And so at the end of this section here on Edom is given no promise of restoration in the end. In fact, like I said, they kind of moved to the west and they're just a remnant left. The Nabateans from the desert, who are really the ancestors of the Arabs, kind of overrun them in the desert southeast part of their land. And they even migrate mostly into Judah. That's how Herod got influence in Judah in the days of Jesus, because a lot of the Edomites actually just lived in Judah because they were being overrun by the Nabateans. So there's the word of the Lord to Edom. No reason to think the Edomites are still around today, whether biblically or historically, they're not. And now we go to verse 23. From just these few verses, 23 through 27, we look at what's going to be called Damascus, which of course we know is the capital of Syria, not to be confused with the ancient nation of Assyria. The ancient nation of Assyria, that was a world-ruling empire before Babylon, Assyria was headquartered in Nineveh. You've probably heard of that before. Nineveh is the modern city of Mosul in northern Iraq today. That was the Assyrians, right? The Syrians was this nation comprised around Damascus, the very Damascus that's still there today in modern day Syria. Damascus, Syria, still there today. In fact, that's what we're going to talk about in this short little section about how Damascus is still there. It's a very, very fascinating thing that they're still there. Let's just get into that in verse 23. Concerning Damascus, Hamath and Arphad are put to shame. These are some of the surrounding cities, right? For they have heard a bad report. They are melted away. There's anxiety by the sea. It cannot be quieted. Verse 24, Damascus has become limp in their hands. She has turned away to flee, and panic has taken hold of her. Distress and pangs have seized her like a woman in childbirth. So Damascus, of course, the capital of Syria now. It was the capital of Syria then. This Damascus, they did fall to the Assyrian Empire based in Nineveh back in the 700s BC, which was about 100 years before Jeremiah is writing this. I think it was in the 730s BC. But this one here, these verses, and we'll get into a few more verses about Damascus, this is clearly a reference to then when the Babylonians conquered them because of verse 27, and we'll get to that in just a second. So Damascus became weak, and this reference here to the sea, there's anxiety by the sea. It's probably better translated as being tossed by the sea is the idea. So the idea is they're expressing Damascus's anxiety as being tossed about, like, woe is us, what do we do? You know, like, we don't know what to do here. The idea of constant battles on every side. And that's actually one of the features of Damascus. Prominent city up on a hill, high elevation, a beautiful, wonderful place, but they're able to be attacked on every side. And so they had constant warfare, being attacked from everybody, all around, all the time. It was a very difficult place to be. Let's go to verse 25 about Damascus. How the city of praise has not been forsaken, the town of my joy. Therefore her young men will fall in her open squares, and all the men of war will be silenced in that day, declares Yahweh of hosts, or the Lord of hosts. In verse 27, I will set fire to the wall of Damascus, and I will devour the fortified towers of Ben-Hadad. Of course, that was the king at the time, and so that helps us place the dating of this a little bit better. And so Babylon here destroys the power of Syria, centered in Damascus here. Interesting that God calls it the city of praise, or the city of his praise, or the city of his joy here. Damascus is, even to this day, Damascus is the oldest continuously inhabited city in the world. It has never yet been destroyed. You can go back even to the stories of Abraham. Do you know in the story of Abraham something to do with Damascus? And that's 2000 BC. You remember Abraham was praying for a son. What did he say to the Lord when he said, Lord, are you going to allow me to have a son? Right now, this servant of mine from Damascus is my heir. Right? So even then, this remark about Eliezer, his servant from Damascus. Even later on in Abraham's story, there's another instance with Damascus. Do you remember when Lot gets taken prisoner from the 5 kings? And then Abraham has to go rescue him, and Abraham chases down these 5 armies. I'm still picturing that in my head, by the way. Abraham with his large family army chasing after these 5 small kingdoms, to get back Lot. I mean, that's amazing. That's amazing. I want to see that. I want to see the reel-to-reel of that when I get to heaven, how he did that. But where did he chase him to? He chased him the whole way back to Damascus before he got Lot and brought him back home. And so Damascus, this very, very prominent city throughout so many, I want to say decades, but I mean, millennia, even more than centuries throughout the timeline. They have been there, and they have always been there. And we know that they're still there today, and yet there's this prophecy coming soon to a theater near you in, let's see if I've got it up here, Isaiah chapter 17. Tells us in chapter 17, verse 1, this is the oracle or the word concerning Damascus. Behold, Damascus is about to be removed from being a city and will become a fallen ruin. That's never happened yet in world history. It's never, ever ceased from being a city. All of these other nations we've looked at, Babylon or somebody conquers, takes over, wipes them out, nothing's left. And yet this has never, ever happened to Damascus. And so many biblical scholars are still looking for this to yet happen. It seems that maybe this could be the trigger that would launch us into the Ezekiel 38 and 38 war, where Russia, Iran, and Turkey come against Israel. It could be the trigger. Who knows how these things are going to line up and piece together. All I know is that there are many people bombing at the Damascus airport all the time. Even just yesterday, there was some more terrorists that were taken out at a place right off the runway as they brought in more weapons. It seems like they bring in more weapons and then they bomb them as soon as they bring in the weapons. So that's happening all the time. It'll be interesting to see what happens in Damascus in the very near future and how that might line up with Russia's involvement in the Middle East. I don't know if you've seen, here's another interesting piece of the story of how this all goes together. You might think, well, Russia still has nothing to do with the Middle East. Yes, they do. They have been all through Syria for the last 10 years since the Syrian civil war broke out. And just the other day, I saw some soldiers, Russian soldiers still in Ukraine, but Russian soldiers in Ukraine that were wearing the Hezbollah badge on their uniforms. And so that's the alliance that's being formed between these Muslim nations with Russia, and certainly Turkey is right there too. Turkey is one of the most fascinating countries of all this. They became a NATO country two decades ago. So America and others have this Article 5 requirement to support them. And yet Turkey just a week or two ago went to the UN and asked to use lethal force against Israel to beat them back out of Lebanon and other places. So it's no wonder why America would have to stand on the sidelines if Russia and Turkey and Iran invade Israel. And as Ezekiel says, the young nations just look on and say, what are you doing? Have you come to take a spoil? And we don't do anything about it, as if our hands are tied. So we don't know exactly the order and operation of how these things are going to line up, but man, every year things come clearer and clearer on how it could happen and the order of how things might line up. And so Damascus still has a lot of activity to yet happen in the very near future. We go to verse 28. This brings us to the fourth of 5 nations we're going to look at here. We use the word nation very loosely for the next one we're going to look at from verse 28 through verse 33. This is really Arabia. It's really the Arabian tribes. All of these that we're going to look at here are in modern Saudi Arabia. Why do we call it Saudi Arabia? It's the house of Saud. It's a family. It's a family of the Saud family. I don't know what order. Sometimes you put the last names first or the first names last, different things. But it's the Saud family. I don't know if I'm saying that the proper way. That's how it got the name, the modern name in the 20s of Saudi Arabia. Okay, it's just Arabia, but now it's called Saudi Arabia in this area. Well, we're going to look at some of these, I don't even want to say cities. You can't say cities when you're talking about Arabia. You really want to talk about placements, settlements.
You've been listening to Believing the Word, a ministry of author and pastor Dan Shunk at Calvary Chapel Chambersburg in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. Pastor Dan has been teaching through a series in the book of Jeremiah. We'd love to get connected with you and hear about how God is working in your life through this teaching program. You can reach us by phone at 717-500-1102. Again, that number is 717-500-1102. You can also check us out at our website, cchambersburg.org, where you can learn more about the ministry of Calvary Chapel Chambersburg and find our chapter-by-chapter messages. If you're in the Chambersburg area, we'd love to have you join us Sunday mornings and Thursday evenings on 5121 Coffee Avenue. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll be back with more from the book of Jeremiah. But until then, this has been Believing the Word with Pastor Dan Shunk.